Let's move to our next topic, that is exception propagation. The question is, what is exception propagation? So to understand exception propagation, you first have to understand what is calling method and what is called method. Let's say you have method A and you have method B, and method B is calling method A, then method B will known as calling method and method A will known as called method. The method which is getting call is known as called method, and from where you are making the call is known as calling method. So method A will be called method and method B will be calling method. Similarly, method B can further call by other method, let's say method C. So from method C context, method C will be known as calling method and method B will be called method for method C. Okay. Now let's suppose method A is throwing some exception. Okay, then that exception must be handled inside method A itself. But if you will not handle it inside method A, then that will be automatically forward to the calling chain. It will be forward to the method from where method A was called. Method A was called from method B. That means that exception will be forward to the method B, and then you have to handle that exception inside method B. Again, if you will not handle that exception inside method B, then it will further forward to the method C. Again, it will be forward to the calling chain, and that is known as exception propagation. Exception will automatically get propagate further in the calling chain if you are not handling that exception inside the same method where that exception is actually occurring. Let's understand this with this implementation. I have a method 1 here, which is simply printing inside method 1. I have method 2, which is printing inside method 2. And similarly, I have method 3, which is printing inside method 3. Okay. Now this method 1 is calling from the main method. Okay. And I am using some handler here. Forget about these handler as of now. Okay. Just understand method 1 is calling from main method and method 2 is calling from method 1 and method 3 is calling from method 2. Okay, now let's suppose method 3 is throwing some exception. I have created a situation where exception will be occur. I am creating here arithmetic exception. Okay, if I am not handling that exception inside method 3 itself, then that exception will be automatically propagate or forward to the calling chain, means it will be sent to my calling method, which is method 2. Okay, and method 2 need to be handle that exception. Okay, but if you are again not handling this exception inside method 2, it will be again forward to the calling chain, it will be again propagate to method 1. Similarly, it will again forward to the calling chain and it will finally goes to the main method. So either you have to handle it inside the method where it is occurring. If you are not handling it, you can handle it anywhere in calling chain. Either you can handle it in method 2 or else you can handle it in method 1. If you are not handling exception in any of the method, then it will finally goes to the main method, and then you must have to handle it there. If you will not handle it here itself, then it will goes to the compiler and it will terminate your program abnormally at the same point. Okay, so to avoid abnormal termination of a program, you have to handle the exception anywhere in the calling chain, and if you will not handle it anywhere, then it will keep forward to the calling chain, and that is known as exception propagation. You can run this and see. First, inside method 1 is getting execute, 2 is execute, and 3 is executing, and in the end you are handling it here inside method 3 and it is throwing some exception, but you are able to catch that and you are avoiding abnormal termination of your program by using handler inside the main method. This is the default behavior of exception propagation, means exceptions will automatically forward to the calling chain. Okay, but the most important thing you have to remember here is this default behavior of exception propagations works with only unchecked exceptions, only for runtime exceptions. Okay, means method exception will be keep forward to the calling chain only when your exception which is occurring is of runtime exception type. Okay, because here we are getting arithmetic exception and arithmetic exception is runtime exception. That's the reason it was forwarding to the calling chain automatically, because exception type was runtime. Okay, but if it is checked exception, okay, if it is some compile time exception, then that exception will not automatically forward to the calling chain. Then you have to forcefully forward to the calling chain. Okay. And for that reason, you need to use throws keyword. Now let's see this implementation of exception propagation in case of checked exceptions. Okay, I have a superclass and this superclass is holding one method named read file, and there I am throwing the exception. Now you can throw the exceptions by two ways. One is either you can create the condition like I was creating in my first implementation, where when that condition will execute, that appropriate exception will be throw. Okay, or else you can also use a keyword called throw. You can simply say throw and can create the exception class object for which you want to throw the exception. Okay, one more thing you have to take care is you have to pass some message to the exception constructor, so that that message will be displayed when that exception will occur and you can easily recognize the exception. Okay, so you have both of the ways. Either you can create the condition which will throw the exception, or you can use throw keyword and create the exception class object, and then you can throw the exception. So here we understand that throw keyword is used to throw the exception from any method or from any condition manually. Okay, now if I am having this method which is throwing some IO exception, you can see this exception is of checked exception type. Okay, so what I need to do is I have to handle that exception from the line the exception is occurring. Okay, and because this is of checked exception type, that means I have to handle it at same place. So you can see if I'm not using any throws or anything, then it will start showing you error. It is saying either you have to handle the exception here itself, surround with try catch. Let's say if I click here, it is automatically wrap this exception line in try block and using appropriate catch block with IO exception class type reference variable. Okay, but if I don't want to handle this exception here itself, then how can I forward this exception into calling chain? I don't want to handle this exception here. I want to handle this exception in my calling method, which is read file method of subclass. Okay, so how I can forward this into the calling chain? In my previous implementation, exception was automatically forward to the calling chain. Okay, I was not handling exception propagation by my own because the exception type was of runtime. But when it comes to the checked exceptions, if you want to forward it into the calling chain, it will not automatically goes there. You have to forcefully forward that into the calling chain, and for that reason you need to use throws keyword. So you can simply click here add throws declaration, and then when I'm saying this, that means my method is saying that this method is going to throw a checked exception, and programmer don't want to handle that exception here itself. Programmer is forwarding this exception to the calling chain, means it is need to be handled inside my calling method, that is this read file method. Okay, now, sometimes they will ask you this interview question that what is the difference between throws keyword and throw keyword. Okay, throw keyword is mainly used to throw the exception object. Okay, and throws keyword is used to forward the checked exception object into the calling chain. For that reason, we are using throws keyword. It's pretty simple. So whenever you are dealing with checked exceptions, if your method is throwing some exception, either you have to handle that exception there itself using try catch handler, or else you need to forward that in calling chain forcefully by using throws keyword. And then again in the calling method, either you have to handle that exception there using try catch handler, and if again you don't want to handle it there, then you have to further forward that using throws keyword again. So in that way, you will forcefully keep forwarding your checked exceptions using throws keyword. And in case of unchecked exceptions, it will automatically forward to the calling chain. Now, one last question remaining here, that is why we are forwarding exceptions into calling chain either by using throws keyword or automatically. Why we are keep forwarding them in calling chain, why we are not handling at first level itself? Because sometimes you don't want to handle the exceptions separately in separate methods. Instead of that, you want to handle all the exceptions in one method or in some certain method. Okay, in that case you want to forward the exception to that method and there you handle the exceptions. For example, for this implementation, in main method, let's suppose I'm calling multiple methods, okay, and I don't want to handle the exceptions in those methods separately. Instead of that, I want to handle all the exceptions in main method itself. I want to use try catch handlers inside my main method only. Then what I'll do is I'll keep forwarding the exceptions until exception will not reach to the main method, and then I handle all the exceptions at one place. So for that reasons, sometimes I need to forward the exception to the calling chain, and for that reason we need to use this concept of exception propagation. For the reference notes of exception propagation implementations, you have to go into this exception propagation folder. Here you will find this file. In the same file I have placed both of the implementations, so you have to scroll down and you will find both of the implementation here.